We are launching Predator-Free New Zealand, an ambitious world-first project to fight back against introduced pests that threaten our native wildlife, our economy and primary sector.
That was July 2016. With much fanfare, John Key's government proudly announced the lofty new goal. New Zealand would be predator-free by 2050. In the line of fire, rats, possums and stoats. Everyone, it seemed, was on board.
Predator-Free New Zealand is a long-term project that will deliver benefits for New Zealanders, including removing the major threat to our native wildlife, saving money spent on pest control operations, opening up new opportunities for regional development and enhancing our trade and tourism brands, and most importantly, it'll create a legacy for future generations to enjoy.
But fast forward to May 2025.
It's feared New Zealand's goal of becoming predator-free by 2050 is under threat with the closure of a state-owned pest eradication company. It'll save the government more than $12 million in overheads, with the Department of Conservation picking up the workload.
And this time, not everyone's on board.
It was an absolute bombshell for us.
I think from a purely human point of view, it seems like a pretty rubbish way to wind down an organisation, to tell them on budget day. It looks like a cost-cutting exercise, so I don't know that it's got much grounding in conservation strategy.
Kia ora, I'm Amanda Gillies, and on The Detail today, what's happening with Predator-Free 2050, and will we still reach the goal 25 years from now?
New Zealanders believe in the predator-free 2050 dream, and we want the government to get behind it too.
Are they?
Not sure. I've not been seeing a lot of enthusiasm for environmental outcomes from this government, full stop. I mean, we describe the government's policy agenda as a war on nature, and I think it's disappointing that a previous national government got so strongly behind this moonshot objective, and this government just doesn't seem to care that much.
That's Dr. Kayla Kingdon-Bebb, the Chief Executive of WWF New Zealand and a staunch supporter of the Predator-Free 2050 program. More from her in a moment. But first, Newsroom Environment Editor David Williams, who says both critics and everyday Kiwis are
worried for this program, and without ongoing funding, we will not only not go forward, we will go backwards. This program needs funding, and that's up to this government.
He's been covering Predator-Free 2050 since it was launched by Key's government 9 years ago. He says many were taken aback when the current national-led coalition government dropped the bombshell that Predator-Free 2050 Limited, a Crown-owned charitable company set up to achieve the goal, was being disestablished, swept away in a cost-cutting drive. The company co-funds large-scale predator elimination projects and the breakthrough science to support them. But now it's going, the government says this will save $12 million. And the management of the predator-free program will go to the Department of Conservation, reducing duplication and increasing efficiency.
I was quite concerned, actually. It seemed to me that there's been a lot of bad news for the environment, and this was yet another one. But then when you dig a little bit further, it wasn't as bad as it possibly could have been. So, yes, the company is folding, but the work will be folded into the Department of Conservation. Obviously, that's good and bad. The government is looking for efficiencies. This is part of its cost-cutting drive. And in fact, they're saying, well, this falls into DOC's wheelhouse. This is very much what it does, and so it can very adequately manage this, and we don't need a separate company to do it. And, you know, and some people say that's actually common sense. That's okay. But then you look objectively at what the Department of Conservation is doing, what it's capable of, and the backlog of work, whether it's maintenance on our huts and tracks, whether it's the pest control itself that it manages. Things are not easy. It's a bit of a struggle, and there have been job cuts at DOC. So it's very much an open question as to how well this will go. The other thing I had in the back of my mind is that I'd recently done a story on pest-free Banks Peninsula.
Operating across 23,000 hectares, the team at Pest-Free Banks Peninsula are on a mission to eradicate pests.
Well, probably our star project right now, exactly this week, is that we have announced that Aotearoa Township is possum-free. So that means no possums.
And what they'd said is that they got these millions of dollars, some of it through Predator Free 2050. They've done a great job. It's almost 10,000 hectares in Banks Peninsula, which is just off Christchurch. 10,000 hectares is pretty much pest-free. It's suppressed to the point where they're moving to other parts, but their funding runs out next year. So the bigger question, I guess, is the funding that they had, and a lot of other groups have had, for these large-scale projects to get rid of these awful predators, possums in Banks Peninsula, things like hedgehogs in other places, rats and stoats and weasels and that kind of thing. Are they going to get more money? And so, yes, it's one thing to fold this into DOC. It's another thing for the government to continue to fund the work that's going on now.
I want to talk about DOC in a moment and whether they can handle this, but just for our listeners, why is it so important that we are predator-free? What is the problem that these predators pose to our country?
Well, millions of years ago, New Zealand split away from Gondwana land and predatory mammals hadn't evolved. And so this allowed the birds to do whatever they wanted. Some gave up flight. They went onto the forest floor. But then when humans arrived and the colonial settlers arrived, they brought a lot of predators with them. So there were rats on ships. That we got possums because we thought the fur trade was a great idea, and then we got rabbits along. We thought, oh, rabbits aren't really good. We'll just put in stoats and we'll control the rabbits that way. And so we had all of these pests, and it's become a real problem. So the pests don't only eat the birds and their eggs, they also cause huge harm to our forests. And so we might plant a beech forest, but then there's a lot of damage done by these little nasties. And so that's why it's important to get rid of them, because it's good for our bird life, which is iconic, and it's really good for our forests too.
And we've had 9 years since John Key's government said we've, got this new lofty goal of predator-free 2050. How good have we been and successful in the past 9 years of trying to reach that goal?
Well, it's a big goal, and I think it's really hard to project forward to 2050 and say, this is a linear goal that we have and we are at this point. There's still a lot of things to get right before we could get to 2050. But they did set themselves a few goals to start with, and actually they've done pretty well. They said they wanted something like 1 million hectares of new predator-free area, and they got to 800,000 hectares. I mean, that's a big amount of land. And they said they wanted to fund scientific research. 15 or 20 projects, I think, have had money to try and sort this problem out. So things like thermal cameras, different ways to get in there, and so that the technology can be used to get rid of these things without us having to hump in great traps everywhere into the ravines and the forested areas of New Zealand where people don't live. They've done pretty well, and a lot of community groups have latched onto this. Someone said to me that this is probably the one conservation project that's captured the imagination of New Zealanders more than any other. And so you'll see large amounts of community groups almost everywhere you go.
So this is one of our trusty trap boxes. They get pretty hammered out here with all the elements.
Armed with traps, the war on predators hitting the streets of suburbia. The bait laid, peanut butter and dehydrated meat.
They will catch stoats and weasels and rats, which are the main big three that we're going for in this eradication.
And if you think about the winds like Capital Kiwi, I think it is, and Miramar Peninsula around the capital, these are places that have had huge gains and they've done very well. And so there's been a lot of community time, so a lot of volunteer hours, a lot of philanthropic money that's been thrown into this as well, but also the arm of government. The government has had the attention, and through this particular company, there's been a laser focus, is what they say, on getting rid of predators. And the worry is, should you shift this to DOC, maybe it won't be as laser focused, because DOC has a very wide mandate and it has a lot on its plate.
See, that's my worry, because, if they do, when they do take over, can they realistically sort of fill the gap without losing this amazing momentum we have right now?
Well, I think that depends on a lot of things, unfortunately. I'm going to caveat that answer. The short answer is they're going to struggle, you would think, because actually that's a lot to manage. But because there are already systems in place and a lot of community groups out there, there is already a groundswell, a momentum to this work anyway, and so that may continue. But yes, there is a risk that that this won't be their only job and that it won't get the attention it needs. But also, if you think about the way it's been to date, the fact that you had one place that funded it and that was its sole job, then that gave it a lot of momentum by itself. And so without a driver and that single focus of one organisation, that is a big risk. And also it's the imagination, right? The moonshot, this 2050 goal, it captured the imagination. There's a lot of people. You need more groups and more areas doing this work. And is there that kind of imagination inspiring message from the government? I think that's a big part of their work, to be able to say, we're still into this, let's get going, and to inspire the next generation of trappers and hunters to go in there and sort these predators out.
Have we heard, David, from Predator Free 2050 Limited or from DOC and their takes on it?
Yeah, absolutely. DOC says it can do a good job, that this is important work, and they do a lot of it anyway. Yes, they do the big 1080 drops all around the country that help suppress predators in that way. So the funding of groups, they say they are capable of doing it. This is their job and they can do it well. Predator Free 2050, they talked about the fact that they've met a lot of their goals. They did a great job. They're very sad, obviously, about people losing jobs. I mean, again, this is about not just the work, the funding. This is also about people whose livelihoods depended on this company. So that's a very sad part of this. And they said that they were buoyed by the fact that this is something that the government is still intending to do while the company is folding, the vision remains. And so they thought that was better than it could have been, I guess.
You just spoke about the amazing work on the Banks Peninsula. We've had some great stuff in Taranaki and Hawke's Bay. Will we see a rollback of these gains, do you think, as a result of this decision?
You've got to think that without funding, yes, we will. So it's one thing to trap effectively, to go in there and suppress predators from an area, but then you've got to defend it, right? The work doesn't stop. I was trying to think of an analogy this morning, the way to tell this. Maybe a colander is a good way. So a colander has holes and it's leaky. So there are going to be predators. If you don't plug the holes, the predators are going to get out, right? And so I guess that's a plugging the holes thing. So you are plugging the holes in the predator area, if you like. But if you just leave it to its own devices, then it becomes leaky again. And so that's what you hear. There are areas that are being defended up and down the country, and they have to act very quickly, particularly the predator-free offshore islands. If they find a rat on there, and if they don't find it for a number of months, it can go in and cause havoc. And so it's the defence of the gains already that is one of the risks here.
What I find so interesting, David, is it was, a John Key government that set this up, yet it's a national-led coalition that's changing it. How unusual is that, and what are they saying?
So, no, they say that, hand on heart, we're still committed to this, and the folding of the company is not the end of this work. But there is an uncomfortable alignment, isn't there, with John Key's government announcing this in July 2016 and this company falling over. But people are practical about this. They say that, well, maybe the company wasn't the best model. A lot of people didn't think it was in the first place. These are conservation groups. They say that they would have preferred a different model, a company having a private sector company to drive this wasn't right. And so I think people are sanguine about the idea that the company might fall over, but actually the work can continue.
Realistically, if you were to say today, will we reach the goal by 2050?
I think it's really tough. I mean, I don't think so, but you've got to have a vision, don't you? You've got to be ambitious, and you've got to get people involved, and that's where the imagination comes in. It's a very big goal. If you think about all of the rats, or even just all of the possums, in one night that do all the damage to the trees and eat the birds and take their eggs from their nests and actually go into the trees where they normally nest. There are millions and millions of these things. So it seems unachievable at that time. But boy, can you imagine if a lot of people went and did this, they went into their backyards and they trapped in the way that they have in Miramar and other parts of the country. I think we can achieve a lot together. But 2050, all the predators gone, pretty big goal that.
Kayla, are we still predator-free in vision or just in name?
I believe we're still predator-free in vision. I mean, it's going to take more than a budgetary decision by one government of the day to de-enthuse Kiwis about this goal. I think it's captured the heart and soul of New Zealanders, and I believe that we're all committed to it.
Dr. Kayla Kingdon-Bebb has been a supporter of Predator-Free 2050 since day one and doesn't support the government's latest decision.
I think of all the conservation initiatives that have been kind of put forward in New Zealand in the last few decades, it's certainly captured the hearts and minds of New Zealanders like nothing else. We've seen an explosion of kind of community trapping groups and landscape scale projects over the last 10 years, which has been amazing. And my initial reaction was that the government was looking to take the foot off the pedal, to be frank.
What does it actually mean for the future of the program?
I think it depends. So what is apparent is that the government's had a look at the delivery model of the program as a whole, which is complex, right? So if it's the case that the government has reviewed it and determined that a Crown-owned corporation is not the best delivery methodology, then I can accept that, to be honest. There's a lot of capability in DOC and out in the wider community. Perhaps it is appropriate for DOC to be coordinating this work. Perhaps there was duplication of roles and functions and costs. But where I would be concerned is that in the wider scale of what's gone on over the last two budgets, I think the Department of Conservation in total will be seeing something like $300 million of savings exacted from it. So it does beg the question of, whether a very stretched department is able to pick up the leadership of this initiative in the way that we might want to see it done.
She says over the past 9 years alone, remarkable work has been done to get our country on the road to being predator-free.
The Predator-Free 2050 initiative has always been a moonshot goal. But I have been incredibly heartened to see the progress that has been made over the last 9 years since, the wider cross-government initiative was announced. I think we've seen a great deal of investment made. I understand the Predator-Free 2050 Limited Company had invested about $92 million in 18 different landscapes projects, which is quite significant. And the hectarage of the projects was almost near 1 million hectares. And so that's, to note, that's projects that are largely not on public conservation land. And a lot of people don't realize, but some of our most threatened habitats are actually not on conservation land. They're often on private land or land in other tenures. So the progress in substantive terms is there's some big numbers there. But to me, the most incredible progress that we've seen is the uptake in community-led trapping efforts.
Nearly every fourth home on Wellington's Miramar Peninsula will have a trap. Possums are already eradicated and backyard trappers are making ground against others.
Just behind that fennel bush, you'll just see a tui having a feed there. There he is, right there.
Bird life has been flourishing since Wade Hammond started trapping. In 3 months, he's caught about 300 rodents.
I mean, every community in New Zealand practically now has a bush restoration program, backyard trapping. The movement has really galvanized the public. And even leading into 2016, New Zealand fortuitously had one of the highest rates of conservation volunteerism globally, which is just wonderful. And, I think it's reflective of the significance with which we attach nature and our native species to who we are as New Zealanders. But that's grown, almost exponentially, I would say, through the Predator-Free 2050 movement. And it's amazing to see communities coming together around these initiatives. It is really special.
On the flip side, do you worry now that this decision could trigger, say, a loss of community engagement or donor confidence and support?
Possibly. I like to think that when a community kind of gets enough momentum together, they can achieve a lot off their own bat. They don't necessarily need a Crown or corporation or even a government department constantly supporting them once they've kind of got the project underway. It does require sustained effort and coordinated effort. And I'd like to think that the Department of Conservation is game for that, because I think that's an important role that they can play as the strategic lead of New Zealand's biodiversity system.
Yeah, because I guess the question begs is, can DOC realistically fill the gap without sort of losing momentum?
Yeah, and that is the real question, I think.
She has serious concerns about this and also the good work of the past 9 years being undone.
The reserve here, this is where the rats have been eliminated rather than suppressed, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it took us about 6 months of really intense efforts, but we've now eliminated all of the rats out of this area. So
how do you know?
We've got a lot of monitoring that goes into it. Trail cameras, a big one. They're just about the golden standard we can get for monitoring rats.
The Zero Possum Project is a possum eradication where we're completely removing possums from the Kaitaki range right down to the coast. It's never been done in this sort of landscape, so that's what makes it a really challenging but really exciting project.
It's globally recognized that these types of initiatives are really, really important in turning the tide for our threatened biodiversity. And in New Zealand, that is absolutely the case for us. We have 4,000 threatened species now. Many of them are increasingly being pushed towards the brink as a result of a number of pressures, one of which is climate change. And it also bears noting that New Zealand is actually a global leader in predator eradication. This is something that a lot of people don't know, but New Zealanders really have led the world, particularly on offshore island eradication efforts. So things like the Antipodes or Whenua are other predator-free islands, which are the really important kind of mainstay habitats for some of our most threatened species like kakapo, the Antipodean albatross. Globally, if you go to any offshore island eradication project, almost anywhere on this planet, you will have a Kiwi involved in it, whether it's a helicopter pilot or whether it's someone doing the eradication planning work. We are globally renowned for this type of work, and that is testament to its importance to our country.
She says WWF commissioned a report this year focusing on the economic benefit and risk of investing in biodiversity recovery. Part of it looked at eradicating invasive pests and predators.
The project indicated that New Zealand could grow economically by $270 billion over the next 50 years. That is a big number, right? Huge. It indicates to us quite clearly. And of course, it's consistent with global conclusions as well, that if globally we don't deal to the halt of nature decline and we allow ecosystem collapse to proceed, that could cost the global economy $2.1 trillion by 2030. Like, that's huge. And my theory has always been that New Zealand is actually more risk exposed than the global average because we are so highly dependent on nature-based tourism, on primary production, and of course, a healthy natural environment is the heart of all of that. What is very clear evidence that investing in conservation, investing in biodiversity recovery could save New Zealand billions of dollars over the long term, help us grow in a nature-positive way, reinforce our clean green brand, et cetera, et cetera. Our government seems very committed to cutting biodiversity spend. And I think it's incredibly short-sighted. And I am concerned about what that means for our threatened species and ecosystems. And I'm concerned about what that means for future generations of Kiwis.
That's all for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Thank you to Dr. Kayla Kingdom-Bebb and David Williams. This episode was produced by Gwen McClure and engineered by William Saunders. I'm Amanda Gillies. Matua.